Hello, this is Emily. Welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I will be filming my June reading wrap-up. Now in the month of June I did have a very successful reading month and I completed a total of 24 books, which is very great because I was just trying to read and prioritize getting my TBR down, and so I successfully accomplished that. And I guess let's hop right on in and I will go through all of the books I read this past month. The first book I completed was Murder Your Employer, McMaster's Guide to Homicide by Rupert Holmes. This is kind of a satire where we are following three different students, Cliff, Gemma, and Dulcie, as they complete their final thesis in the art of deletion. And this one I did listen to on audiobook. The narrator was absolutely superb in this, and there was such dry, dark humor here, and I just could not put this one down as I was listening, wanted to know what happened next. And I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars, and I would definitely recommend if you're looking for something kind of set in the 1950s with some dark humor that reads as a mixture of story and thesis. The next book I read in the month of June was Orange is the New Black. This is another audiobook I listened to, and this is a memoir following Piper's incarceration. And obviously there is a hit Netflix show that this book is based on, which Netflix show was definitely more dramatized than the book itself, but the book was still a very interesting read, and I did enjoy the narrator while listening to it. The next book I completed was another audiobook, which I did listen to a lot of audiobooks this past month, and was All That's Left in the World by Eric J. Brown. I believe this was his debut novel, and it's a young adult dystopian following Andrew and Jamie, and it's set in a near distant future where a super virus has taken out much of the population. So I guess kind of a COVID book, but I still thought it was a very enjoyable read. I gave this 3.5 stars. Sometimes the pacing was slightly off, but I still enjoyed the listen overall and thought it was a great, cute little story despite the dark times it was set in. I ended up physically reading Spellbound by F.T. Lukens, and this one I had such high hopes for. Unfortunately, it fell short to my expectations, even though I did love the prior two works by this author. And this is a young adult urban fantasy set in a world where magic exists, and we follow Rook and Sun to different points of view. Rook used to be part of the magical world, but after his grandmother dies, he gets cut off from it, and then he gets brought back into that world when he stumbles upon Antonia, who is a very strong magician in this world. And then he ends up meeting Fable and Sun, which introduces Sun as our second narrator, and their kind of Fable is kind of the rival to Antonia, and it's just very enjoyable read, though pacing obviously felt rushed at times, as I mentioned previously, and I only ended up giving this one 3.5 stars despite me wanting to love it so much. I ended up listening to the fourth book in the Trials of Apollo, the Tyrant's Tome, on audio, and this one I gave 4 stars, and here we get more of Apollo's dirty past brought to life, and we're seeing a lot of character growth with him, with the way he is beginning to show regret for his past action. And I'm not going to go too much into the plot itself because I don't want to spoil the prior 3 books, because a lot of what happened here is very big spoiler to what happened previously. So if you haven't read the series, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'm just going to say great character growth in this one and 4-star read. Another book I physically read this past month was a solid 5-star read for me, which most of his works usually are, and that is Follow the Argosi by Sebastian de Castell. And this is the second prequel following Ferris's journey, and here she must stop this mysterious red scream that is wreaking havoc around her, and she ends up stumbling across Benta, who is deaf and mute and somehow has the power to stop the red scream. as well as meeting Rosie, which we know Rosie from the previous books. And here we also finally have Ferris select her Argosi name. But I really did enjoy this. I couldn't put it down, kept flipping through the whole time I was reading it, and definitely a stellar read. Ended up listening to The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi on audiobook, and this one had a very slow start, and I almost DNF'd it, but then once this story started to pick up, I was ready to figure out what happens next. And this one, we are following Amina, who ends up going back to piracy in order to keep her daughter safe. And this one was a very wild ride, lots of adventure, and I really did enjoy the journey itself, as well as a lot of the characters introduced. And I feel like there's going to be more in the series the way this one ended, so I can't wait to check out what happens next, especially after how she ended the book. So great read, 4 stars, really did enjoy. Legends and Latte was another book I physically read this month. It was a 4.5-star read for me, and this just is like a cute little cozy fantasy where we follow Viv and Orc and her newfound friends as she sets up a coffee shop for the first time after retiring from being a mercenary for years. And I just thought this was just a nice, cute, little cozy read. There was some drama in it, and I was intrigued to learn what was happening and all that as I kept going, but also didn't have to put too much thought in it because there wasn't too much going on. It was just trying to get that coffee shop started mainly, but great read, really did enjoy, and can't wait to get the sequel to this. Another book I read physically this month was Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh, and this was a very brief read, and we are following Tobias, who is tethered to the woods, and Silver, who stumbles across him one day, and just kind of their story. And we learn about how Tobias came tethered to the woods, and we also have a rescue mission here, even though it's very short. This was a 4.5-star read for me, and I did really enjoy the narrative itself and how fast-paced it was. I ended up listening to Unwell Women, Misdiagnosis and Myth in a Made World on audiobook. This is a nonfiction that kind of details the history of diagnosing women in medicine and how often they are often misdiagnosed or their ailments are brushed aside because they're being seen as hysterical and stuff. So this was a very eye-opening read, and I could see a lot of stuff and truths just from past medical journeys with myself too, as well as other women I've known that have had issues finding answers of what's causing them problems. So definitely great read, and I would recommend checking out if you want something very informative. I finally finished the Dreamer trilogy with Greywaren, and this one I listened to on audiobook and gave 3.5 stars. I just wanted to love this spin-off trilogy. I just didn't care much for it as I did the original series, though I still did enjoy this one. And here we finally got the origin of the Brothers Lynch, so I still would recommend checking this out. It just wasn't my cup of tea, but I still thought it was enjoyable. I read the graphic novel Lore Olympus Volume 4, and this was a 5-star read for me, and I really do love seeing Persephone and Hades' story continue on, as well as the wide assortment of all the other gods featured here. So definitely a great read with beautiful art and story. I finally concluded the Rainwild Chronicles with Blood of Dragons. This one I listened to on audiobook because it does have a very superb audiobook narrator, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I think this book did a very great job of wrapping up the series nicely and tying up a lot of loose ends. So definitely recommend checking out this whole series and all of Robin Hobb's book because she is one of my favorite authors. So, great read. Another book I physically read this month was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. And this is the first in a duology, I believe. And it is set in a world where vampires meets Hunger Games, and we are following Aurelia, who ends up entering the legendary tournament in hopes of winning to be granted a wish. And this is a slow burn romance with a lot of action and fighting and death on top of that, but still a very intriguing read overall. And I think one of my favorite quotes from this book that I read was, "The line between anger and sadness is so thin. I had learned that fear can become rage, but rage can so easily shatter into devastation." And I thought this quote was just really well worded and makes you think. But again, this book was a 4.5-star read overall, and I can't wait to read the conclusion to this series. I started reading Heatwave physically, but then I switched over to the audiobook, which I'm glad I did because the narrator did a superb job getting the writer's sarcastic humor across here. And this is the finale to the Extraordinaries trilogy, and we kind of see everything wrapped up. Nick has a new villain to stop. He's also learning how to adjust to his newfound powers, as well as help his friends. And of course, we have the Dad Squad to the rescue in this series. But overall, great read. I gave this one 4 stars, and I did enjoy this trilogy and just the dry humor and sarcastic banter throughout. I finally finished the Foxglove King after starting it back in March. I switched over to the audiobook because unfortunately, physically, I just was not grasping the story. And just, even with the audiobook, I still found it a struggle to get through. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. And this one's following Lore, who can harness Mortem, and she's kind of forced to work for the church and spy on the prince, basically. It's kind of the plot here. And the book itself is stunning. However, the story itself was just a meh read for me and such a letdown because I had such high hopes for this. The Kingdom of Liars by Nick Martell was actually a very big surprise for me. I wasn't expecting much, and then I could not put it down as I read. This is a debut fantasy novel that I ended up reading physically, and we are following Michael Kingman, whose family has been branded as traitors, and he's kind of trying to restore their name, as well as get revenge against the person that framed them by just trying to discover out who they are. But overall, very great read. I gave this one 4 stars, and I can't wait to read the other 2 books in this series. I read the manga Monster and the Beast Volume 4, which is the final volume in the series, and I really wanted to love this, and I just felt they kind of rushed that ending after the 3rd volume ended. I was a little confused with what happened here, like how it started and stuff. So I felt like they kind of try to push everything into an ending and give us a resolution and backstory. And I did not like the backstory. And I don't think that the backstory should have been illustrated because it is not an okay topic to have. I'm not going to spoil it, but very triggering and very frustrating. And therefore, I only gave this one 3.5 stars because I just was very upset with that I read. Another book I physically read this month was The Immortality Thief by Tyrant. Solid 5-star read, and I could not put this one down. I was literally up late reading it. It was just that compelling, and we are set on a abandoned spaceship. There are biologically altered monsters on the spaceship, and there's a lot of running, chaos, and fighting to survive, as well as intriguing characters and just a whirlwind of a ride. definitely would recommend checking out the sci-fi because I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can't believe it's going to be so long before the sequel is released. Finally finished the Chronicles of Chrestomanci Volume 1. This is actually 2 stories in one. I listened to the prior story back in February, and I finally got to the second story in here, which I also listened to on audiobook. This one was a 3-star read for me. It was okay, but I did find myself bored at times. I will probably continue on with the series, but still probably not one I want to pick up right away. So it might sit on my shelves for a while if I ever do continue on with the series. I listened to all of Us Villains on audiobook, and this is a Hunger Games meets magic twist. And we are following 4 different characters who are a part of this. And there's a lot of betrayals, fights, magic, and a little bit of romance thrown in. And I really did enjoy the listen. Some characters I enjoyed more than others to listen to their point of views. But I will continue on with the final book in this series. So this is a duology because I did enjoy this first one and gave it 4 stars. I completed Servamp Volume 18 and I gave this one 4 stars. This one, we finally learned the origin of how the Servamps were created, as well as Sloth's origin story. And I feel like we're slowly getting ready to end the series and leading towards the final battles now that all the backstories have kind of been brought out. So I can't wait to see how the series is going to conclude because I have been reading it since the beginning and just patiently waiting for each new volume to be released over the past few years. Love is an Illusion, Volume 2. This was actually technically a reread for me because I did originally read the whole Lesbian comics, not once, but twice. And now I'm getting the physical volumes now that they are being released. This was a 4.5-star read for me. I really do enjoy this story, though I know sometimes the characters can be frustrating, but overall, really great read, and the art is stellar here. The final book I read this month was a physical read, and that was Trailer Park Trickster by David R. Slayton, which is the second book in the Adam Binder Chronicles. Unfortunately, this one wasn't as great as the first book, and I was a little let down, especially because the majority of the book, Adam and Vic are not even in the same room. They were going in separate paths, which was kind of frustrating because after everything that happened in the first book, I wanted to see more of them together. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I will be reading the third book because this one did have a very big cliffhanger, and I want to know what's going to happen now, and hopefully we will get more Adam and Vic scenes in the third book together because unfortunately this one did not have much there, though we did learn a lot more of Adam's family and their past and all the magical people in his family, but still a little bit of a letdown. Well, I guess that's it for today's video and all my rambling of all the books I read this past month. Hopefully it's not too long, though 24 books is quite a few to review in one setting. But I guess if you did enjoy, feel free to click the like and subscribe button down below. And if there's any books you read this month that you really enjoyed, feel free to share them. Or if you saw some faves that I mentioned here or not so faves, share them as well. But I guess that's it, and I will see you in my next video.